Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Think Unbroken Podcast. I owe you an apology. I'm sorry. I haven't done a podcast in a while, in about a month now. It's been kind of a hectic, crazy month, to be honest. I got sick a few weeks ago and ended up in the hospital for a few days in Bali. With like the worst food poisoning I've ever had in my life. I actually got E. Coli. It was that bad. So that kind of threw game plan off. And then I injured my knee, and I've now in a really intense knee brace sitting in an Airbnb in Bangkok right now. Luckily, I went and had an MRI, and it turns out that nothing is completely torn. I just have a partial tear in my MCL. So I'm going to rock a brace for a couple of months and hopefully be back to normal very soon. While I was in the hospital, a collection of basically 6 days of my last 30, I realized that self-care sometimes means going to the doctor. When I was young, and I want to talk about this particularly, especially amongst men, right? Because I am a man. I understand what it's like to grow up in a society of, rub some dirt on it, dust yourself off, you'll be okay. Don't cry. Don't worry about the pain, man up. And sometimes that's detrimental. I think a lot of times that's detrimental, and it puts us in a predicament of, what's more important, ego or health. And unfortunately, a lot of times, self-included, I have chosen ego and not been literally humble enough to take myself to the doctor. But I find that when it comes to people who have experienced childhood trauma, there are so many people, and I see this again and again, not only with myself, but with others, that we put off our own health. And the reason is when we are coming up, and we are in a state of trauma, and we are constantly being abused or hurt or not taken care of, that idea becomes our foundation. Why would we take care of ourselves knowing that no one leading up until this moment has? I remember one time, this is an insane story, but it's 100% true. I grew up in the Mormon church, which I've mentioned before, and my mother found ways to really navigate the system of the church to get food, clothing, have our rent paid for from time to time, and even at various points, shift my brothers and I off to live with all these families. And the Mormon people are really good people, the majority of them. Not to say that I didn't run into some really bad ones, but that's another story for another day. So I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I'd come down with the flu. And I don't recall a time in my childhood ever being that sick, except for an asthma attack that happened when I was in Kentucky, which put me in the ICU. And I think I was about 6 at that point. And so I'm 9, 10 years old, and I remember laying on the couch with this incredible flu, a temperature of 103 degrees, throwing up, can't eat, shivering, and even blacking out at some points. I will never forget this. And I came to, and my mother was laying on the couch, intoxicated, and I was begging her to take me to the hospital. Now, you have to understand one thing that's really important. At that time, we were extremely poor. We were entirely impoverished. We had no money. We were living on food stamps and government subsidies. Most of our food was actually coming from the church. So it wasn't uncommon that medical care would come secondary. And this is the case scenario for so many families in the United States and around the world. It's not exclusive. And so that day I say to my mother, I really need to go to the hospital. I feel like something is really wrong. And instead of her taking me to the hospital, what she did was she called the church. And next thing that I knew, one of the deacons of the church and a handful of missionaries were at my house. And they were standing over me on the couch. And here I am, imagine small 9-year-old me laying down, shivering, covered in blankets, sweating profusely, really close to death at this point, shaking. And the deacons and the missionary, they put their hands on top of my head with anointed oils, or I should say they anointed me with oil, and they prayed over me. And that was the treatment that I was receiving at that moment. And an hour or so goes by, they pray on me, they, anoint me with more oil, blah, 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 and then they leave. Well, I remember getting up, walking into the kitchen where we had a phone with one of those very long wired cords, and calling my grandmother and telling her to pick me up and come and take me to the hospital. And she did. And that is probably the only reason I didn't die that night. And I remember I was in the hospital for the next 2 days on IVs, very, very sick. A couple years after that, I broke my foot playing basketball out in the neighborhood with my little brothers and some of the neighborhood kids. And this was only a few weeks after my brother-in-law tore his Achilles playing basketball. And so I remember thinking to myself, like, oh no, I wonder if I tore my Achilles, not realizing, at 10-year-old that your Achilles is on the back of your heel and not the side of your foot. But what I did do is tear a couple of tendons on the outside of my foot when I rolled my ankle, which I thought was a high ankle sprain. And so I hobbled back home, and my stepfather was living with us still. And I go in the house and I'm like, hey, there's something really wrong with my foot. And he's like, it's fine, just put ice on it, you'll be fine. And I tell my mother later that night when she gets home, and kind of the same response, it's probably just a sprain, don't worry about it. Well, a week goes by and I'm still complaining, I can still barely walk, and I'm asking them, please take me to the doctor, there's something wrong here. And yet, again, they refuse. Another week goes by, and I'm at school, and I convince the nurse to call my mother to come and pick me up to take me to the hospital. I literally cannot walk at this point. My foot is inflamed. Like every single step is like a dagger in my foot. And finally my mom comes, picks me up, takes me to the hospital. We get an x-ray, and the doctor's immediately like, oh yeah, you have to have surgery. Like your foot is destroyed. And so I ended up 2 days later having a surgery on my foot to repair the damage, and being in a cast for, I believe at that time was like 12 weeks. It was my entire summer and the first part of school heading into, I want to say, my 6th or 7th grade year. As an adult, I have lacked immensely in taking care of myself. And that is something that I'm constantly working on. Like if I look at my bucket list of things that I have to do in terms of self-care, like going to the doctor is at the top. And I have found over the course of the last 4 or 5 years that I have to go to the doctor a lot. And I can't continue to put things off until they get better on their own. And more I find that things can't get better on their own without some type of medical intervention. And that's not to say I'm going and taking a lot of medications or I'm going to visit the doctor more often than necessary, because trust me, I'm the first person to tell you I hate going to the doctor. Every time I go, my blood pressure is through the roof, my anxiety is spiked, I am freaking out. But in that, there is a certain sense of self-care and responsibility that comes along with it. Not that long ago, I should say, and I don't know that I've ever talked about this. I got diagnosed with SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And basically what that means is the bacteria in my small intestine started going nuts, causing me to be malnourished, causing me to become very sick. And one of the ways that I lost a lot of weight was actually from malnourishment. And when I first got diagnosed with SIBO, over the course of a year, I dropped like 30 pounds. It might have been more, I'm not certain, but it was somewhere in that window. And so I go to the doctor, and I'm in Indiana at this point still. And I walk into this gastrointestinal, that word I cannot say clearly. I walk into this gastro's office, and I sit down with him, and I was very frightened because I thought maybe I had cancer or something of that nature. And this doctor tells me he has no idea what's wrong with me and asks me if I'm stressed out. And I look at him and I go, yeah, doc, of course I'm stressed out. I I come from a traumatic background. My cortisol levels are through the roof. I have been in fight or flight since I was born. Yes, I'm stressed out, man. And he tells me, oh yeah, it's probably just stress. Plus I was running 2 businesses. My relationship was failing. My health was clearly poor. Yeah, I was stressed to the max. So the doctor tells me it's just in my head. It's just in your head. You need to find a way to relax. And I said, okay, doc, you're probably right. So I start working on trying to find ways to relax while changing my diet and starting to really put into some self-care. And nothing changes. I go see another doctor, and still nothing changes. And all these doctors cannot seem to find a solution. Well, fast forward a bit, I go to Portland, I find a doctor who figures it out, who pinpoints it almost immediately and says, oh yeah, this is what you have, this is the protocol, this is what we're going to try to do, and in doing this, hopefully this will make you healthier. Well, what happened is I ended up getting C. diff. And C. diff is a bacterial infection that actually, here's how I would put it. Imagine a chainsaw that is on fire, cutting you open from the inside out, directly inside of your intestines. That is what C. diff feels like. And that infection kills people. Every single year, over 100,000 people in America die from it. And it could be even more. And it's highly contagious and it's really, really bad. And I had to do this thing called a FMT, which is fecal matter transplant, something that in Chinese medicine they've done since 500 BC, but in Western medicine is just now becoming understood to be something that has efficacy. Well, the reason that I'm telling you this story is, one, that it took me a lot of effort to get to the point of finding health and to be in a healthy place like where I'm at right now. And the other part of it is understanding how important self-care in regards to your physical body is. I should say my physical body is. And I've put it at the priority. And this isn't just about the gym, and it's not about sleep, and it's not about meditation and calming the nervous system. It's about actually going to the doctor. I started talking about knowing so many friends who suffered childhood trauma who do not go to the doctor, who will be sick in bed for days and days and days without seeking care and without seeking treatment. And that's unsurprising to me because that's our foundation. We come by it honestly that we are not good enough to be taken to the doctor. Whether it's a financial thing or whether it's a family thing, I don't know that it really matters. But in our head, what it comes down to is the understanding that no one took care of us, so why should we take care of ourselves? This was something that I had a realization that was my mindset here within the course of the last few months. Yes, I had gone and seen the doctor various times throughout my teen and adult and my early 20s, for physicals and general checkups and things like that. But never when I was sick. I only ever went to the doctor when I was healthy. And when I was sick, I had to force myself. I recall once lying in bed, my girlfriend at the time begging me to go to the doctor and me refusing. I was so sick that I thought I was going to die and I refused. And she literally dragged me out the door and took me to the emergency room. Like, I was weak enough that even at 6'4", 6'5", 200 something pounds, this tiny woman was able to take me to the emergency room. Because I didn't feel like it was worthy of a doctor's time or attention to see me, and I felt like a burden. And this is so common that somewhere along the lines of self-care, the idea of self-preservation is interrupted due to the trauma that we suffer. So self-care became this idealistic thing that I considered to be something that people do, but not something that I did. Until I realized that it's actually one of the most important things that we can do. Going to the hospital, while awful and in general terms is a terrible experience, or even going to the doctor for that matter, is something that if we want sustainability and longevity that we just have to do. I found out through going to the doctor that I had an autoimmune disease, something called POTS, which is postural tachycardia, which in a sense is like Basically, what it means is my heart does not beat fast enough to pump blood through my veins. And so I'm prone to fainting very easily. And this is actually something that a lot of people who are really tall suffer from. And so it's POTS, POTS. I might have actually said that wrong, but anyway. So I go and find this doctor, and they go, oh yeah, this is an easy solution. All you have to do is just basically add more salt to your food, stay away from sugar, and you'll be okay. I was standing up and almost fainting 10 times a day. And now I just have a couple teaspoons of pink Himalayan sea salt throughout the course of my day, and I'm totally good, right? A huge difference from where I had been almost fainting daily for years. That's self-care, finding out about autoimmune diseases and things that affect your physical body. That to me is self-care and super important. There's something about agency and the ability to be responsible for ourselves as adults that I think needs to be touched on here. Responsibility as an adult isn't necessarily, having a job and a house and being a good person and, all of those other things. It also includes like that preservation, like going to the doctor, finding out why you are sick, and not looking at yourself as a burden. It's so easy to feel like a burden because that is instilled in you. And it was instilled in me through my childhood. I was not important enough to be taken to the doctor. I was secondary. Whether or not for financial reasons, I think is bullshit. It doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor. You take your children to the doctor if they're injured, if they're sick, if they're having an asthma attack, if they're having an allergic reaction, if they get bit by a dog or whatever that thing may be. And yet that rarely, if ever, happened except the most extreme circumstances when I was a child. And I want to leave this note as I start to wrap up this episode in thinking about the thought of being burdensome to other human beings. I have found unequivocally that as an adult, there is no question in my mind that the people around me want me to be the best version of myself that I can be. That is physically, mentally, and emotionally. And when it comes to being hospitalized or seeing a doctor, that stands fast. When I was in the hospital a couple of weeks ago in Bali for a few days, I had a billion people reach out to me and tell me, hey, do you need anything? Do you need me to come visit you? Sending voice messages, video messages. And I still felt like a burden. I still felt the way I did when I was a kid. Like, even though I know that these people are reaching out to me of their own volition, that they were not being coerced into doing so, and that they actually genuinely care about me, I still felt like I felt at 6 years old, 9 years old, 11 years old, 16 years old, where that I felt like a burden. Even for these people to pick up the phone and text me and say, hey, I hope you're doing well. Do you need anything? Can I come visit you? My response is no. And so I'm challenging myself for the rest of my life, not just like this moment, but trying to work through that process of understanding that I'm not a burden, because I don't feel like that in any other aspect of my life except where it comes to my health. I don't feel like a burden in literally any other area of my life except my health. And that's the most important thing. I've been in a lot of hospital beds looking up at lights. I've almost died a few times. And in those moments, I have felt like, I would rather be dead than someone pick up the phone and call me to come and be with me. And that, for me, is this challenge where it's like, that's the thing that I'm facing right now. Because the self-care in terms of just getting to the doctor, I'm good. I feel like I'm there now. I can go to the doctor. I can take care of myself. I can come to Bangkok to have my knee MRI'd. I can go to the emergency room when I have the worst food poisoning of my life. But there's something about the thought, the feeling of being the burden that still sits with me. I read this really fascinating book, and I mentioned it before, called Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. And it's just about accepting who you are. And my challenge right now for myself and for you, if you're listening to this or watching this right now, is to find ways to continue to accept yourself. And more so with the thought of acceptance, accept that other people care about you. I know that people care about me. I feel that. I accept that. But when I'm at my weakest, when I feel like I am not strong, when I feel like I cannot do things, that's where I want to accept that kind of compassion and care the most. So as I continue to move forward, that's where my mindset is. How do I continue to be better at just accepting care and love? Like, if anything were the theme for my 2019 across the board, friendships, relationships, health, sickness, death, all of those things, I think the number one thing that I want to do is just accept that I'm not a burden and continue to move towards self-care. There's the thought of man up, and I don't think that man up is fair. I think it's bullshit, and I think it leaves people in predicaments of becoming more and more sick or more and more unstable because they feel like they have to do it alone. I think manning up, more so than anything, is allowing people to help you. And so my theme for 2019 is allow the love of other people to sit with me, especially in the moments when I'm most weak, and to ask for help and let other people help me. So just a little thought today that I had as I'm sitting here in Bangkok. I'm finishing the book that I mentioned a couple weeks ago. It's on its tail end. I started it. It's almost there. It's so close to being done. I'm going to change the title. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, but I will soon. But it'll be out by the end of July. So I'm looking forward to sharing it. It is about the baseline and foundation of understanding childhood trauma and how we got to where we are and how we get to where we're going. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this, please subscribe to the podcast. Please tell your friends. Please share. If you're on social media, I'm everywhere at Michael Unbroken. You can check out the workshop for the trauma mindset at www.thinkunbroken.com. And until next time, my friends, be unbroken. See ya.